with reaction and insights to the biggest stories and breaking news from the USA, and a little bit of history thrown in. This is America, a history in the making. So welcome to America, a history in the making, the inaugural episode where we are looking at some of the breaking stories and biggest news in America and giving it a bit of a historical context and just trying to really understand what the heck is going on, which I think is very important at the moment. I'm Liam, host of America, a history podcast, joined by one of our regulars, Emma Long. Welcome to the
morning,
podcast.
Liam. Good to see you.
Yeah, great for you to join me. I was about to say welcome back to the podcast, but I guess this is a sort of a new strand that we're doing, so just welcome.
Yeah, so quite exciting to start something new around this, and it's a good way to start. It's been a fairly busy few days one way or another, right?
It has been a crazy month. I think we've spoken a lot on the podcast about Trump and the Republicans, and there's a natural tendency to sort of look at the Republican Party as where kind of the chaos lies, just because of Trump. But the Democrats have really, pardon the pun, sort of trumped them on this over the past month or so, haven't they?
Yeah, I mean, they've been holding their own, haven't they? I mean, I guess it all started really with the Biden-Trump debate, right? And Biden's less than great performance, should we say, at that. I mean, there had been some concerns before that, so it's not as if the concerns about his age and things hadn't been around, but that really consolidated it, right? Prime time debate. Expectations hadn't been particularly high. It was sort of just Biden needs to get through without making any gaffes, and of course it just went horribly wrong. So that started it, and then it's been a bit of a roller coaster since then, with discussions about who was supporting him, who wasn't, what was happening with campaign donors, because of course money in American elections is so important. And it just snowballed from there.
And I think you kind of hit the nail on the head with the debate, because you're right, like expectations of Biden were not that high, and yet he still somehow managed to not even meet that. And I, as you say, I think for the last couple of years, really, there have been questions around Biden's age and whether he'd be able to deal with the stress of another 4 years in office. And I think with all of that kind of circling before the debate, and with the Trump machine really peddling that as well, it just, all he did in that debate was corroborate all of the critics and all of the doubts that were there. And it was sort of the beginning of the end from that point, because then, as you said, like the donors started pulling out, the likes of George Clooney and probably a lot of other less famous donors were sort of starting to pull their funding. And I think that's the point when like the alarm bells started ringing, right? And then I think as soon as Pelosi gets involved, that's when it's kind of over.
Yeah, I mean, when you've got people like Nancy Pelosi and Barack Obama, I mean, neither of them came out specifically and said he should drop out, but they were encouraging him, right, to rethink or think carefully about his position with deadlines and things coming up. So, when they start doing that, they're not asking the question, are you sure? Are you really sure? And we think the answer is yes, right? It's a loaded question. They weren't going to come out and very specifically say he should drop out, but the pressure nevertheless was building up and up. And I mean, there are questions of around this in the sense, you'd got all of those world leaders just recently at the recent conference was saying, Biden's on it, he's on top of it, he was there, he was present in the meeting, he was discussing all of these details. And it's like, I mean, I know the Republicans at the moment have jumped on the conspiracy theory bandwagon, right, which is part of what they'll do, to say, it's all been covered up and all the rest of it. But you can't get that many world leaders, right, all on board in that kind of conspiracy. So it suggests that Biden, like most of us, right, has good days and bad days. And the debate day just happened to be a bad day.
Yeah. and I think it was just so catastrophically bad that there was just no coming back from it. But I think, when you look at everything that's unfolded since, and since Biden then announced that he was not running again, I I feel like the Republicans' response to this has been so lacking in class or any sort of respect, and kind of shows Trump and JD Vance for who they are, because regardless of whether you think Biden would be competent for the next 4 years, whatever your thoughts about his age, um, you've got to respect the fact that actually in the last 4 years, legislatively, he's been praised for just how much he's been able to do, and that comes from being a really experienced and seasoned politician. And like, he deserves respect for that.
Yeah, I would agree with you, but I think what it shows you is where American politics is at the moment. And that is, it's sort of win at all costs, attack
Mm,
the enemy type politics, where there's no space for what we might think of as statesmanship,
mm,
right? The kind of the ability to say, we disagree with you, we disagree with your policies, but we respect what it is that you've done and that you've done it from your point of view. That's not where the Republican Party is at the moment. And I
mm.
don't think because of that, um, you know, you're not going to see it from the Democrats either. I've been thinking about this recently, and that lack of sort of unity, after, I mean, the one thing we haven't mentioned, of course, is the alleged assassination attempt on
Mm.
President Trump at the rally, which came just before Biden stepped down. And, there was that moment after that where leading Republicans, including Trump himself, were talking about, we need to turn the dial down on the rhetoric. We need to bring a civility back to American politics. There was this sort of announcement that the Republican National Convention was going to be more about trying to bring people together and unifying people. And it just, within a day and a half, that had just fallen apart
Yeah.
as speaker after speaker after speaker at the convention started talking about the radical left and the loony left, and
Mm.
the threats to democracy and all the rest of it. So that's not where the Republican Party is at the moment. And
Yeah.
much as Biden tried in 2020 to, he talked about trying to be a unity candidate. He's not been able to do that, partly from his own party, but partly because you can't fight what the Republicans are doing by that old school civility, right?
Yeah.
So I think this is going to be a nasty election.
Yeah. And
And if we thought 2020 was bad, I think this is going to be a particularly nasty election.
I agree, and I actually had doubts about Harris, not as a politician, because I actually don't know an awful lot about her, but as a campaigner, because her candidacy campaign in 2020 really sort of fizzled out, and when you consider how the Republicans attack their election campaigns, or particularly Trump, you have to come out fighting. You have to be a bit fiercer. You've kind of got to play by their rules to an extent, because otherwise you just get kind of beaten down by their sort of bullying tactics. But Harris has in those few days, because she's like within 48 hours of Biden deciding not to run, she had galvanized enough delegates to become the presumptive nominee, which is a hell of a feat in itself.
It's
Um,
interesting, isn't it, in seeing that happen? But I think
mm,
my sense is that there may be other candidates out there who might have chanced it in a different set of circumstances. But I think Democrats understand that this ongoing debate about Biden's competence has been really damaging to their election campaign.
mm,
And what they don't want is a long, drawn out, effectively primary season all over again, with lots of candidates fighting it out and tearing each other down, while the Republicans sit back and watch them do it. So I
yeah.
think the minute Biden said he was supporting Harris, unless she'd been completely incompetent, which clearly she isn't, what's happened is that the Democratic Party, I think, have gone, okay, we don't want an internal battle at this point. We need to coalesce. We need to focus. We need to start, you know, we need to start running against the Republicans rather than running against ourselves at this point. So I think
Yeah,
that's why we've seen that come together. And that's not to say that there isn't a lot of support for Kamala Harris.
yeah.
I don't mean to undermine that, but I think there's a bigger imperative at play here.
Yeah, I agree, though I do think there was perhaps a valid apprehension about Harris's ability to campaign successfully against Trump. But it, any concerns that were there, I think she's gone to great lengths to alleviate in that opening speech that she gave to really kick off her campaign. I think that soundbite about having experience of dealing with Trump's type,
Mm.
and give it you sort of and in the same sort of line, kind of nodding to her credentials. I think was a great way to kick off her campaign and position herself as an opposite to Trump. She really seems to have won support from, I guess the people you'd expect to be loyal Democrat voters, particularly African Americans, and I think that's probably one of the reasons why people were quick to get behind Harris, because obviously she was going to be able to cement those votes. But I read, actually, just before we jumped onto this call, I read that she's part of a sorority group which represents over 4 million people, and that organization has announced that they're going to basically go in hard on educating people on voter registration and really trying to tap into them 4 million people, and that in itself, in November, if those 4 million people come out and vote for Harris, who either may not have voted before or might have actually been swayed towards Trump before Harris was the nominee, that can be the difference maker.
Yeah, and actually go for the sororities here. I mean, we don't have them in the UK, right? So it's very much part of American culture and university culture more than it is in other places. But this is the female equivalent, right? The fraternities in the US. Male politicians have gained benefits from the connections that they make through them for years. So, it's great to see that actually this is playing out for female candidates too. But on the point of about Harris's abilities, right? Yeah, I mean, I know there was some concern, mainly because when she'd run for office previously, both for the Senate and for Attorney General, she hadn't really run opposed, so she hadn't had to kind of run the kind of campaign that she is going to have to run now. And there had been that concern, but oh yeah, she came out swinging, and I think some of it is based on, there was a campaign ad from the Biden-Harris campaign that had come out not long before all of this blew up, which took the kind of tone that she took in that speech, which is, she prosecuted sex offenders, and just kind of left it hanging, right? As if to say, she prosecuted for-profit universities. Well, Trump ran one, those kinds of things. So those points were already out there as part of a
Yeah.
campaign ad, but it's one thing to put a campaign ad out that way, and another thing to kind of carry that in a speech and
Yeah.
sort of bring that out. And I think she did that, so she needs to keep up with that, because we've already seen what the Republicans are going to throw at her. And while I've spent a lot of time over the years sort of decrying the lack of civility in politics, and I don't like the politics of fear and the kind of attack politics that have come to dominate US politics, particularly in the last few years, but we've seen in British politics a little bit, certainly sort of around Brexit and since,
Yeah.
although this last election there seemed to have been less of that here in the UK. But that's not going to, the politics of civility are not going to cut it in this election. They're just not, because the Trump and the
Yeah.
Republicans are going to play that game.
And
And to some extent, this is going to have to be fought on those terms.
I think the Democrats learned their lesson after 2016 because they tried to do that with Clinton. I think they tried to just bat off all of the sort of the Trumpism as, you know, just bravado, as, you know, all the stuff that, because at the time it was, you know, it was crazy that someone would campaign for president in the way that Trump did. And I don't think the Clinton campaign took that seriously. And I think Biden recognised, and I think now Harris is recognising, that sometimes, you know, you've got to fight fire with fire. And if Trump's going to drag it down to those levels, you've got to meet him somewhere halfway at least.
Yeah, I think that's probably the case. And yeah, you're right. We've had 8 years of it, really, haven't we? You know, since 2016, even though Trump wasn't elected in 2020, he's been there. He's been a factor in American politics all the way through. So it's sort of not like he didn't go away. So people are more used to it. And yeah, I think they're gonna. We're already seeing what they're throwing out at Harris. So it's going to have to be tackled one way or another.
Yeah, I mean, I think it goes without saying that Harris's back is against the wall now in how she's come to be the nominee, and the fact that they only have 3 months to campaign. Because, you know, when you look back historically at when this has happened, I forget who the Democratic nominee ended up being, but Eisenhower really romped home in 52. LBJ decided to step out of the race for re-election in, was it 68? And then obviously Nixon absolutely ran away with it. There's not particularly a precedence for late nominees winning presidential elections, is there?
No, although both of those examples, there were very particular political issues around. So in 68, the country and the Democratic Party in particular were bitterly divided over the Vietnam War, which of course is why Johnson didn't run again. And what you saw in the Democratic convention there were a number of candidates who took so very different positions on the war. So it really was a kind of deep ideological division. In 1952, when Truman stood aside, the US is in the middle of the Korean War. So again, you've got that sort of national security issue going on in the background, and divisions about that and what that means after World War II, as well as some domestic issues happening, which is why Truman then stands aside. So the Democratic Party, it's not to say that it's not divided, but it seems to be doing its best not to appear to be, and they aren't as divided as, say, they were in 1968 over Vietnam. So I think there's an element of historical specificity there that's worth bearing in mind.
Yeah, and I guess actually, you know, when you look at the sort of the platform, when you look at you know, how the campaigns are being run at a party level, the Democrats are really using this platform of, you know, this is a matter of preserving our democracy. It's what Biden launched his re-election campaign with at the start of this year. I mean, I guess you could argue that him stepping down and the messaging that he's put across on announcing he's not running again is really consistent with that. You know, the Democrats as a party are still fighting on that platform of, this is not about any one individual. This is about stopping Trump and preserving democracy. And it perhaps would have been antithetical to that platform for Biden to continue running. So maybe this will be different, and maybe actually you can see the immediate impact of Harris. The donors are coming back. The money has been flooding in. Suddenly, the Democrats are the ones getting all the headlines and all the attention.
For the right reasons, right?
Exactly. Maybe it's just actually the sort of masterstroke bit of campaigning that the Democrats needed to get one over on Trump.
Yeah, it's all part of their strategy. No, I mean, yes, I think there's an energy about it. There's a question of how far you can keep that. I mean, there's sort of a bit of a honeymoon bump at the moment around Harris that comes partly from relief from Democrats that the issue's been resolved one way or another. But yeah, and I mean, what were the figures? I saw that donations came in. She raised over $100 million within 36 hours, and
Yeah.
a lot of those, importantly, from small donors. So that's from individuals. And we've not talked a lot about campaign finance in the podcasts before, but there are quite strict rules, even though it doesn't always seem like it. There are quite strict rules about individuals and how much individuals can donate to particular campaigns and parties and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
So to have raised that amount of money, and a lot of it from small donors, certainly suggests that there is a groundswell of support here. And you mentioned earlier about people getting excited about this. I mean, one of the things that's been the story of this election, right from when it sort of started back last year, which is ridiculous when you think about how long these things take in the US. But even from last year when people started talking about it, that the idea that this was going to be a Biden-Trump rematch, this was going to be 2020 played out all again. One thing that the polls continued to show was that the vast majority of Americans were not excited about this. They
Mm.
didn't really want these two candidates fighting it out against each other. And there are big questions around, the fact that the system as it plays out, this is the best candidates that it could find. I mean, but people clearly weren't enthusiastic about
Yeah.
either of them. And one of the discussions, particularly around the Democrats, was the fact that people who didn't feel that energized about it, they wouldn't vote for Trump, they just wouldn't go out and vote at all. And ultimately,
Yeah.
because the election's likely to be so close, that could have been the tipping point that would tip the election to Trump. But what at least seems to be happening at the moment, and hopefully the Democrats will keep the sort of momentum going to make it a competitive election. It seems to have energized people who may not have gone out and voted otherwise. I think there's
Yeah.
the difference. I don't think Harris is going to bring necessarily new constituents into the Democratic Party. Women of color particularly have generally historically voted more heavily Democrat than Republican, but I suspect what she might be able to do is encourage people who didn't previously feel excited or enthusiastic about going out to vote, making it more likely that they will vote. And that could then be the tipping point in the election. And
Mm.
young women, one of the issues that Harris has led on during the Biden administration, and is clearly going to be part of her campaign, and which Democrats have been using generally, is the issue of abortion and reproductive
Yeah.
rights. So we're 2 years on from the overturning of Roe versus Wade. We've got 14 states have almost complete abortion bans now, and there are restrictions in at least the same number of other states, and we're seeing an awful lot of discussion about what that actually means on the ground for people who are pregnant, and the stories beginning to come out about the way people are treated, or the concerns that are arising from doctors and so on and so forth. So
Yeah.
that's an issue that is likely to motivate particularly young women to go out and vote who don't necessarily vote in huge numbers. Before you've got a female candidate, you've got a candidate who's a woman of color
Mm-hmm.
hitting on the issue of reproductive rights and reproductive freedoms. You would think that would be an issue that would motivate quite an important group of people to go out and vote.
Yeah, and I think there's definitely, perhaps more so than in any other presidential election, going to be a really distinct polarization of voters, because you've got two very different candidates demographically, but also politically. And as you say, Kamala Harris has been the spokesperson essentially for the Democrats on abortion rights, and trying to campaign for that overturning of Roe v. Wade. Whereas Trump represents the exact opposite. And I think there's there's such a binary opposite in the two candidates here. It makes me wonder, who are the voters that are going to decide it here? Where are the demographics of people that are still undecided here?
Yeah, I mean, we all know from the discussions about American politics, right, that you've got core voters on for either party who would never dream of voting for the other party. So Democrats who'd never vote Republican, Republicans who'd never vote Democrat. We've seen that in politics in the UK as well, although this last election seems to have upturned certain assumptions. But there are kind of historically those kind of core voters that you can draw on, who you're never going to convince. So American elections for many years have always been fought in the middle, right? Those kind of moderate voters and swing voters who have historically shifted from one party to another. Often talk about Reagan Democrats, for example, who registered Democratic voters who liked Reagan and voted for him in huge numbers and gave him the successful results that he had in 1980 and 1984. That group is getting smaller as American politics has polarized more. That group of sort of swing voters in the middle, I think, has got smaller. And before all of this came up, the discussion about Biden and Harris and everything else, coverage was talking about the fact that the election could be swung by as few as 40,000 votes spread across 6 states, right? Because what we've talked about before, the way the electoral college system works for president is that it's 50 state votes, not a national vote, which means you can win a small number of states by massive margins and lose a lot of states by small margins and lose the election.
Yeah.
As we saw with Hillary Clinton in 2016, you can win the popular vote but lose the electoral college and lose the election.
Yeah.
So how this plays out is, the pollsters haven't quite managed to get to that yet. It's complicated, and they've got some work to do. But it does suggest that it doesn't take a particularly large group of voters to swing this
Yeah.
one way or the other. And even if it's slightly more than 40,000 people, it's still a relatively small group within a bigger electorate.
Yeah. And do you think then this gives credence to the possibility that Shapiro could be Harris's running mate? Because I think it's widely expected that she's going to pick a white man just because of how American politics works. And with Shapiro being in Pennsylvania, that being a swing state, it feels like a bit of a no-brainer at this point.
Yeah, it'd be nice to think that you could have 2 women on the ticket and that wouldn't be an issue, but clearly it would be. That's not where American politics is at the moment. Certainly, all of the discussion up to this point about the vice presidential candidate has focused on the fact that it would be having someone from a swing state. I mean, that doesn't necessarily mean, of course, that you would secure the state. The assumption is it would. So yes, I think certainly one of the people from from one of those swing states seems most likely to be the vice presidential nominee. But I think they'll hold off, and I think they'll try and make a sort of a big announcement of it, and hopefully there'll be another kind of bump in enthusiasm for it. So I can see that they'll hold off on that a little while to get the maximum sort of political benefit from the announcement and how that plays out. And equally, I'm quite sure that Harris and her advisors are weighing the benefits of one person over another and how that plays.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, there's going to be a lot of updates in quite rapid succession, I imagine, because we are only 3 and a bit months out from the election. I mean, we're normally talking about all this stuff way ahead of now. So it's going to be it's going to be a very unique
Yeah.
campaign.
And I think
Um,
it's interesting in itself, right? We say it's only 3.5 months, right, till the election. But if you think about the recent French elections and the UK elections, they were announced and done and dusted in significantly less time than that. It's only in the
yeah,
US where we are used to these elections going on for so long that you would say 3.5 months is a short amount of time.
it's a
And I
fair point.
think it's probably worth, I mean, it that's how it works, right? That's the way the system is. But I think it's worth us taking a step back and sort of looking at that and saying that tells us something about the nature of the American campaign, right? That 3.5 months, a time in which other nations can hold their entire electoral process and have governments in place. In the American context, we think of that as being near to the election.
Yeah, yeah. I guess you're right. We're we expect such long lead times for the US election, and I guess that's quite unique versus pretty much anywhere else in the world, right? Um, but as it currently stands, I think as we sort of wrap up this particular chat, the state of the race as it currently stands, who do you think has the advantage right now?
You're going to put me on the spot, aren't you? You do this.
I do.
Um, I honestly think at the moment it's probably too close to call, and
Mm,
I think the momentum at the moment is with Democrats, simply because there is action
mm,
taking place here, right? There's been change and there's something new and there's excitement about that. And actually, one of the interesting things about the sort of the response from Republicans, both Trump and Vance and other leading Republicans as well, has been that they're sort of, there's only so many times you can label people from the Democrats as like the extreme left or the radical left or the loony left before it
mm,
stops having an impact. Um, you know, it's sort of change of the record, right? You've been there. You accuse
mm,
Biden of being that. Now you're accusing Harris and you're accusing other people. There is a risk for Republicans that they're going to get stuck with the same old message that they were throwing at Biden and others, and that since they've now got a new candidate, that may not play so well. I mean, it'll play to the base, but it may not necessarily attract as many people as they think it will.
yeah.
So, there are pluses and minuses on both sides. I think at the moment, as we sit here at the end of July, it's probably too close to call. I don't think the Democrats have suddenly shot ahead of the Republicans. It's going to be, I think, which party manages to adapt to the new reality of what the dynamics of this campaign will now be,
Yeah.
who will prove to be successful.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think it's still Trump's to lose. But I think a week or two back, there seemed to be no hope for the Democrats catching up. I think now they've given themselves a fighting chance, but I guess we'll see over the next sort of few weeks and up until the Democratic convention, how Harris's campaign takes shape, and then I'm sure we'll have a much better idea as to sort of who's maybe got that momentum long term leading up to the election. But I think we have to say it's still Trump's to lose at this point, like because there's still ground to make up from the Democrats, right?
Yeah, I think that's probably true. Yes. Yeah. Well, I'm sure we'll be back talking about the latest twists and turns in this already remarkable election at some point fairly soon.
Absolutely. I mean, yeah, the first of many chats I think we're going to have over the next few months. And I'm sure listeners will be sick of our voices by the time November 5th rolls around. But yeah, until next time, I mean, I think definitely the Democratic convention is going to throw up some surprises. But if anything major or shocking or surprising happens before then, and hey, this is another Trump election, so no doubt, there will be. We'll be back on talking about it. Emma, thank you so much for joining me on this.
No
And
problem. Speak soon.
yeah, indeed. Thanks for listening to America, a history in the making. If you enjoy the show, please go and check out our main episodes, which drop every Tuesday, and we've linked to some relevant episodes in the show notes for you as well. Remember also to visit our Patreon page where you can support our show. For just a few dollars a month, you'll unlock some awesome perks, and it helps us to keep the show going, which we really appreciate. Thanks again for listening, and until next time, in Pod We Trust.